The president returns to the Big Apple.
No KKK, no fascist USA.
And an uproar continues over the violence in Charlottesville, Virginia. International religious freedom.
Hosanna, Hosanna.
We're at the State Department as it releases its annual report on religious liberty around the world. Celebrating Our Lady.
Che contempliamo oggi nella gloria del paradiso.
The Pope's Mass on this important feast day for the Church, and a reflection on our Blessed Mother through art. And EWTN at 36 years old.
May His eternal word be proclaimed.
We celebrate Mother Angelica's legacy and the future of the network on our anniversary. On EWTN News Nightly for Tuesday, August 15th, 2017. Good evening from Washington, D.C. Thank you to those of you joining us from around the world for news from a Catholic perspective. I'm Lauren Ashburn. Controversy follows President Trump on his first trip home to New York City since taking office. Protesters are upset with his response to the violence in Charlottesville, Virginia. Correspondent Mark Irons reports from the White House, where the president faces pressure to shake up his administration. Good evening, Mark.
Good evening, Lauren. Some of Trump's own advisors are peeling away, and minority groups want him to cut members of his inner circle. The clamor all stems from the weekend violence sparked by hate groups and what some people see as the president's poor response.
Fallout from Charlottesville spilling over to New York City. The president greeted by more than 1,000 protesters as he returns to Trump Tower for the first time since his inauguration. Critics say he did not respond soon enough to condemn Saturday's white supremacist rally in Virginia that ended in a woman's death and frightened the city of Charlottesville.
But they saw what looked like an invading army.
Jared Stepman from the conservative outlet The Daily Signal witnessed the tension firsthand.
And I think it is the president's role to calm the fears of Americans and say that we're going to do something about it, that these kind of awful things don't have a place in this country.
Trump did call out the hate groups by name yesterday,
including the KKK, neo-Nazis, white supremacists.
But he's frustrated his comments still haven't silenced critics, tweeting, "Made additional remarks on Charlottesville and realized once again that the fake news media will never be satisfied. Truly bad people." Trump also lashed out at the presidential advisors who resigned in the wake of the violence, saying, "For every CEO that drops out of the Manufacturing Council, I have many to take their place. Grandstanders should not have gone on. Jobs." Some lawmakers want the president to remove 3 aides from their jobs at the White House. The lawmakers wrote a letter to Trump calling for the removal of Steve Bannon, Stephen Miller, and Sebastian Gorka, saying their presence is emboldening a resurgent white supremacist movement, a movement Jared Stepman says is out of step with America.
I think it's important with moments like this to say that these people don't represent us. They don't represent the mainstream Americans. They don't represent the mainstream Trump supporters.
The outrage against hate groups prompted protesters in North Carolina to tear down a Confederate statue. Those protesters could now face felony charges. Lauren.
Is President Trump still focused on the fallout from Charlottesville?
He's highlighted the federal investigation, but he's also advancing other parts of his agenda. Today, he hosted a discussion on infrastructure at Trump Tower before signing an executive order to speed up the infrastructure approval process. Lauren.
Correspondent Mark Irons at the White House. Thank you, Mark. Kim Jong-un appears to be backing off the threat of an attack on Guam for now. The North Korean leader finished reviewing a plan to fire 4 missiles at the U.S. territory. State-run media says he will wait to see what the, quote, foolish Yankees do before making a final decision. U.S. Secretary of Defense James Mattis warns that an attack would be game on. Meanwhile, the United States and South Korea are preparing for military exercises next week. The drills often mimic real-life combat situations to help the allies fend off threats from countries in the region. Joint drills have been held since the Korean War ended in 1953. President Trump signs a memorandum paving the way for a possible investigation into China's alleged unfair trade practices. The document directs the U.S. Trade Representative to determine if a probe is needed. It's the first step in potentially allowing the president to take punitive action against China over trade, specifically at allegations of Chinese theft of U.S. intellectual property. The theft costs the U.S. economy up to $600 billion a year. And the Trump administration denounces ISIS for carrying out genocide against Christians and other religious minorities. That announcement came today from Secretary of State Rex Tillerson, who unveiled a report detailing the plight of people of faith around the world. Correspondent Wyatt Goolsbee reports from the State Department. Good evening, Wyatt.
Good evening, Lauren. Secretary Tillerson says there's no doubt ISIS is targeting Christians and Yazidis in Iraq and Shiite Muslims in Syria. Tillerson says President Trump is aware people of faith are under attack and protecting them remains a top priority.
ISIS is clearly responsible for genocide against Yazidis, Christians, and Shia Muslims in areas it controls or has controlled.
Secretary Rex Tillerson removing any ambiguity about previous genocide assertions made by his predecessor, John Kerry, in March of 2016. Kerry had been criticized by lawmakers and religious groups for not announcing it sooner.
Their terrorist members have and continue to target multiple religions and ethnic groups for rape, kidnapping, enslavement, and even death. More recently, ISIS has claimed responsibility for attacks on Christian pilgrims and churches in Egypt.
His comments come as the State Department releases its annual report on international religious freedom. In it, the State Department notes the staggering decline in the Christian population in Iraq within the past 15 years. Prior to 2002, the number of Christians in the country was estimated to be between 800,000 and 1.4 million. Now, it's fewer than 250,000. The report says more than two-thirds of the Christians left in their ancient homeland are Chaldean Catholics. In April, Lauren Ashburn spoke with Archbishop Bashar Warda of Erbil, Iraq, who has been supporting thousands of Chaldean Catholics forced from their homes by ISIS.
Christians and Yazidis, they are so few in number that if you really don't handle them with care and privileges and convince them that this is your country and we are going to support you and help you, because we are lost in all of these disputes.
The Archbishop is helping to resettle Christians in the Nineveh Plain who fled their towns because of ISIS.
In addition to the Islamic State, Secretary Tillerson also called out Bahrain, China, Iran, Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, Sudan, and Turkey for discriminating against religious minorities. Tillerson notes that some 80% of the world's population still lives with persecution or some form of limits on their ability to worship. Lauren?
80%. Wyatt, did Secretary Tillerson mention anything about the Trump administration's decision to temporarily halt the admission of refugees from specific countries? We know many of these refugees are fleeing religious discrimination.
Well, Lauren, Secretary Tillerson did not address that issue specifically, but this report only covers data from 2016 before the travel ban. But it did highlight one interesting fact about refugees in particular. The majority of the nearly 85,000 refugees admitted to the U.S. last year came from 5 countries: Congo, Syria, Burma, Iraq, and Somalia. And if you remember, Syria and Somalia were among the 6 majority Muslim nations included in the travel ban. Lauren?
Correspondent Wyatt Goolsbee at the State Department. Thank you, Wyatt. And joining us now is Nina Shea for the analysis of the State Department's 2016 annual International Religious Freedom Report. Thank you so much for joining us, Nina.
Thank you for having me, and happy anniversary.
Yes, 36th anniversary of EWTN. That's right. You have read this report, and you say the battle is won. What do you mean by that over the question whether ISIS is responsible for genocide against Christians and others?
So the Secretary unambiguously stated that Christians, along with the Yazidis and Shia, were on ISIS's target list, that they intended to kill Christians and wipe out their community, and that this is genocide, and that this is arrived at, this conclusion by the State Department applying the law to the facts at hand.
But Secretary John Kerry, under the Obama administration, did declare genocide in Iraq. Is that in Iraq? So how is this different?
This is different because it is it's so clear that it's an official statement. Secretary Kerry said it was his personal opinion, his personal belief. There was none of that this time. And the UN has put out a report saying that ISIS didn't intend to kill Christians, that they respect them as people of the book.
So why isn't the UN on the same page as the U.S.?
Well, the U.S. should be seeing that the UN is on the same page, and I'm more optimistic. We give a lot of money to the UN for the preservation of these minorities, and they're not reaching the minorities.
What's happening?
The minorities are afraid to go to the UN camps because the persecution follows them in these UN camps. But today, the Secretary said that this is a priority. Protecting these people from extremism, violent extremism, is a priority for the United States, and he will preserve their culture as well.
So, that's important, but let me just follow up on your last point. Are you saying that ISIS infiltrates these camps as regular people? Is that that's what happens? Okay.
ISIS infiltrates the camp, and there are also criminal gangs that pick on the Christians because they know they have ties to the West with money.
Before we go, what do you think this report is going to do to help victims? Is it going to do anything? I know it's a piece of paper that, that has been handed out.
I think there are now clear instructions based on the report itself and also what the Secretary said in the rollout today, that the United States priority is to protect these minorities in the Middle East who are being targeted by religious extremism, either whether it's ISIS or some other group, and that their culture is disappearing and should be preserved.
And that is also very important. When we were there, we watched as cities were decimated. We saw it, and the culture is gone.
Churches blown up.
Churches blown up, exactly. Nina Shea, Director of the Center for Religious Freedom at the Hudson Institute. Thank you so much for joining us. Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro vows to take up arms and fight racists and extremists from the U.S.
A este pueblo no lo intimida ni lo derrota nadie.
Maduro is blaming violence in his country on the United States. He calls the U.S. the greatest threat to Venezuela since the Spanish Empire. President Trump said last week he wouldn't rule out a military option for Venezuela. Iranian President Hassan Rouhani issues a direct threat to the United States about restarting its nuclear program. Speaking in Tehran, Rouhani said if Washington continues with threats and sanctions against the country, its nuclear program could restart within hours. He added Iran seeks to remain loyal to its commitments under the deal, but it could change depending on the Trump administration. Iran signed a nuclear deal with world powers in 2015. A suspected ISIS militant is dead after an explosion inside a hotel in Bangladesh's capital. It happened during a raid on an alleged hideout. Bangladesh has been experiencing a rise in Islamic militancy in recent years. The Red Cross estimates 600 people are still missing after massive mudslides in Sierra Leone's capital. Authorities say more than 300 people were killed in and around Freetown. An estimated 9,000 have been affected by the flooding and mudslides. A tree falls on a large crowd during a popular Catholic festival. It happened at the celebration of Our Lady on the Mount on the Portuguese island of Madeira. At least 12 people are dead, 50 others hurt. Authorities are trying to figure out just why that 200-year-old tree came crashing down. Swedish police say they are helping their Danish colleagues search for a missing Swedish journalist who was last seen in an amateur-built submarine in Denmark. The journalist, Kim Wall, was on assignment aboard the submarine when it sank. The sub's owner, Danish inventor Peter Madsen, has been arrested on preliminary manslaughter charges. 2 elderly bishops in China who spent the 60s through the 80s in forced labor camps have died. Asia News reports both bishops who were recognized by the Holy See passed away this week, one at the age of 93, the other 86. Neither was recognized by the Chinese government, and they were part of the underground church that is faithful to Rome and the Pope. Pope Francis is celebrating the Assumption of the Virgin Mary with a Mass at the Vatican.
Vi auguro una buona festa della Madonna Assunta. Per favore, non dimenticatevi di pregare per me.
The Holy Father is encouraging us all to ask Our Lady to help us be saints. Pope Francis also asked the faithful to pray for him. The Assumption of Mary is a solemnity, or one of the most important feast days in the Church. It marks her ascent into heaven. Coming up, an important race for Republicans in Alabama is receiving national attention as a special primary election takes place for Attorney General Jeff Sessions' old Senate seat. Plus, a mother is appealing to a court after she says her son was given transgender services without her consent. She joins us next. Vice President Mike Pence lays a wreath at the tomb of General San Martin at the cathedral in Buenos Aires, Argentina. The church dates back to the 16th century. It was the home for Pope Francis when he was Archbishop of Buenos Aires. Pence is on a week-long visit to Latin America. Voters head to the polls in Alabama for a special primary election for the Senate seat once held by Attorney General Jeff Sessions. Former state Supreme Court Judge Roy Moore, Alabama Congressman Mo Brooks, appointed placeholders Senator Luther Strange, who you've seen on our program, and 7 others are on the ballot for the GOP primary. 8 candidates are seeking the Democratic nomination. The president tweeted this morning, "Big day in Alabama. Vote for Luther Strange. He will be great." A mother from Minnesota is waging a legal battle over her transgender son. She's suing county and school officials for providing him with transgender services without her parental consent. This happened last year. She says it's a fight to protect her rights as a parent.
Nobody, even at 20 years old, would go back and make the same decisions as they would at 16. No, I mean, I can't imagine any of you in this room would go back and go, yeah, I was proud of that moment. I care so deeply for my son. I want to be involved in this process.
A judge dismissed the case, and now Calgaro is appealing the decision for damages lost. We're joined by Anne-Marie Calgaro via Skype from Iron, Minnesota. Welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me.
You say you have lost your rights as a parent unjustly. Briefly tell us your family's story.
In 2015, I allowed my then 15-year-old son to go live with his biological father. We have a very small school here. It's a K-12 school. And my son then at 15 excelled academically. And so there was a few more opportunities for education at this bigger school in the Sauk Rapids area, which is more in the middle of the state. And so after a lot of deliberation, we agreed to let him go try to live with his biological father. Shortly afterward, he was able to contact, it's called Mid-Minnesota Legal Aid. It's a place that offers services to low-income people, legal services to low-income people. And all he had to do was go visit this place and tell him all kinds of things. They never checked into any of it, and they issued him a letter that said that he was emancipated. And with this letter, he's been able to obtain a driver's license. And
but what about the transgender issue? Tell me about that, Anne-Marie.
Well, that's really not the issue. When this all started, there was never any speak of being transgender. This is really a parental issue, and I think that because the secondary issue with the transgender part of things gains more attention, and I think that that's why people have really clung on to that issue. But the real issue at hand.
Well, sure, but I think that people are saying, are you upset that your son decided to become transgender, and is that the reason that you're filing suit, or is it that it's simply that he's estranged from you, went to live with his father, and he was emancipated without really your wanting that to happen?
Well, legally, he was never emancipated, which the judge did address. We are not estranged from one another. We still have contact. My goal in this is to force the state, the county agencies, and all these facilities and school districts to check with the parents.
But now he's 18 and he's an adult in the eyes of the law. So you have appealed this verdict. What are you asking for?
I'm asking that the state of Minnesota recognizes parental rights, that just because he's 18 doesn't make this stop. There's still other families with minor children who could easily go through the same hoops that my son did and obtain the same emancipation letter and be able to do all kinds of things.
All right. Well, thank you for sharing your story with us, Anne Marie Calgaro.
Thank you so much for having me. Have a great, blessed day.
You too. Up next, the Assumption of Mary, depicted in art. Jem Sullivan shows us a 14th century Italian masterpiece. Plus, 36 years of EWTN.
Eternal Word Television Network, built for you.
How the network is celebrating our anniversary. The Feast of the Assumption marks the celebration of the Virgin Mary into heaven, the subject of a painting at the National Gallery of Art. The Beauty of Faith's Jem Sullivan joins us now to talk about the significance of this beautiful panel. Tell us who this is by.
This is by Paolo Giovanni di Fei, and he was an artist from the city of Siena who was much admired, but also looked to Duccio, one of the great artists of Siena.
And the theme of this painting is the Assumption, I'm assuming. Tell us about it.
Yes, you know, this beautiful painting in tempera on wood was completed around 1400. We see Mary being assumed into heaven, surrounded by a host of angels. The scene is framed by two round panels with the Annunciation scene, the Archangel Gabriel on the one side and the Virgin Mary.
The one on the right here, the woman is the Virgin Mary as well?
That's right.
And then the woman in the middle is the Virgin Mary?
That's right.
Okay.
That's right. And because, you know, the Annunciation and the Assumption are the two sacred events that frame Mary's life and her role as the Mother of God.
I love the bottom, too, with the disciples. What are they gathered around?
Yes, you know, the artist is interested in highlighting the reaction of the disciples to this event. And so they're gathered around the tomb, the empty tomb of Mary, that is now covered with flowers. And they're in awe and amazement at what is taking place. And their response to the Assumption is meant to be our response to the Assumption in giving praise and thanks to God.
The one disciple has his arms out in outreach to the Virgin Mary. What does that symbolize?
So that is the Apostle Thomas, the one who doubted. And he, according to legend, it was believed that he prayed to the Virgin Mary to give him a sign. And she gives him the belt from her robe, a symbol of her divine motherhood, so that he would believe in the Lord Jesus as the Son of God. And so that's what we see there. Thomas is giving thanks and praise to God for this miracle. And really, Mary, in her Assumption, she is, as always, leading us close to her Son Jesus. And that is the great gift of this feast day.
What is your favorite part of this?
I think it is the beautiful way in which Mary is just floating up into heaven, surrounded by the angels, and that sense of she truly is now one with her Son, Jesus.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Jem Sullivan, author of The Beauty of Faith.
Thank you, Lauren.
We have been called the Network of Miracles. We're the first cable channel founded by a woman, and a cloistered nun at that. Jason Calvi brings us behind the scenes as we celebrate EWTN's 36th anniversary.
A leap of faith on this day in 1981, the Feast of the Assumption of the Blessed Virgin Mary.
Name of Jesus, who is Lord, may his eternal word be proclaimed.
With just $200 and a lot of prayer, Mother Angelica launched EWTN. Her impact can be felt the world over as the largest religious media network expands.
But of course, we know that it was the sisters, her and the sisters' perpetual adoration of Jesus truly present in the Blessed Sacrament that fueled EWTN and continues to fuel it. And it's not surprising then that the network continues to grow and its reach and the amount of people it reaches continues to grow.
And today, the community founded by Mother Angelica processes the Blessed Sacrament around the EWTN studios in Alabama.
Come, Holy Ghost, Creator blessed.
And since Mother Angelica's death on Easter 2016, the network has seen a boom, an increased reach of 9.6 million homes outside the United States, most in Latin America and Asia. And that doesn't include online with providers like Apple TV, Amazon Fire, and Roku, all carrying EWTN.
Mother's Network is growing here in Washington, D.C. We've launched 2 new shows this year, recorded in this control room and beamed across the world. But the real heart of what we do is in here, a reminder of our ultimate goal.
If you could think of the happiest day in your life and multiply it 1 trillion times, that's an instant in heaven.
A television icon, inspiring us all to become saints.
I love you. That's not important as much as you know He loves you. Bye now.
Jason Calvi, EWTN News Nightly.
Isn't that just great? Before we go, I want to say how grateful I am personally for Mother Angelica's vision, for the News Nightly team, and the EWTN family around the globe. This job is a dream come true for me, combining my faith and my journalism. A special thank you to our CEO and chairman of the board, Michael Warsaw. That does it for us. For all of us here at EWTN News Nightly, to all of you around the world, thank you for watching. I'm Lauren Ashburn. I'll be back tomorrow with more news from a Catholic perspective. We leave you tonight with Our Lady in Rome. Our EWTN Rome Bureau, also fabulous, shot some beautiful video of our devotion to Our Lady all around the Eternal City. Good night, and God bless.